A Metro Division doubleheader for the weekend. Oh, we are ever so spoiled.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks for joining us on tonight's show. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're heading into a pretty critical weekend for the Jets, especially for Team Tank. I know some of you get tired of me talking about it. Sorry, that's only going to get more intense as we go down the stretch. It's time to really start thinking about the upcoming offseason and the team's future. At this point, I think it's pretty fair to say they're not making the playoffs. They could technically do it, and maybe I'll look stupid in a few weeks, but given how this team has played, I think we can pretty safely cross that off, right? So I've started doing some draft lottery sims. I've been taking a look at some of the top prospects out there that the Jets might be able to draft. I want to talk about all of that, but of course, Winnipeg still has a major piece of business, and that is the remaining few games of the season. A little more than a dozen now, and it starts off this weekend with a big 2-game stretch through the Metro Division. We'll talk about why these games are super important coming right up, but before we did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So, obviously, the Jets are going to be taking a tour through the East Coast this coming weekend. The Jets will be taking on the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Rangers. Intriguingly, both games are going to be pretty early afternoon ones. So if you are in the Central Time Zone, like most of you in Winnipeg are, it'll be 12 p.m. tomorrow, and then Sunday, an 11 a.m. game. We are so blessed to have early hockey. Penguins, Rangers, two teams heading in pretty different directions. The Penguins are trying to rally for one last ride with Sid the Kid. Should be an interesting one. Pittsburgh is, I would say, one of the better teams in the Metro Division. Kind of hard to get a read on this division, though. The East is a little funky, right? The Buffalo Sabres are currently first in their division. The Blue Jackets have stormed all the way back to third in the Metro. It's an interesting time, and I have a hard time getting a sense of like which teams are super for real and which ones are not. I do think Buffalo and Tampa are very real. I think Montreal is fun, a little bit chaotic. And out in the Metro, I mean, the Canes are the Canes, right? They're consistently regular season monsters. They usually make it to the conference finals, and then the problems start to appear. The Penguins are kind of all over the place. I think this is a pretty strong team, and I think in general they have some surprising firepower and depth that I don't know people were anticipating from them. Erik Karlsson kind of having a bit of a resurgence. The Skinner trade has seemingly worked pretty well for them, so the Penguins seem pretty legit. I will say, though, that they do tend to have a lot of loser points, and that's kind of where maybe there's a sign that some stuff under the surface isn't quite as peachy. But this is also a team that is in a pretty firm playoff spot. The only thing that's maybe not firm is the seeding. The Islanders, the Blue Jackets, and the Penguins are all within a point or two of each other, so things are fairly close. It's going to be a hard race. And the Penguins, I did say that they were safely in a playoff spot. Perhaps I spoke a little too soon. Maybe it's a little more borderline. So this game is actually very important for them. And for the Jets, honestly, I think at this point we're just hoping that they don't really accumulate points in a lot of these games. Winnipeg, frankly, needs to drop further in the standings. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but I want to talk about why later this show. I ran the draft lottery simulation, and yes, I only did it about 30 times, but where the Jets are sitting right now actually has a pretty high percentage odds of moving back a spot or two, which is not ideal. The Jets, if anything, need to go up, the draft seeding. So I want to, spotlight that a little bit later. But for this game, I'm kind of expecting the Penguins to be pretty annoying at 5v5. I think the power play is going to be one of their bigger assets. And for the Jets, the biggest thing is the past couple of games, I've seen body language from the team that's starting to look more like the Paul Maurice end of era hockey. And, I know Jeff commented on the last show saying, I rant a lot and everything, and I'm picking on the veterans. And I want to kind of address that because, like, when I'm talking about the top line in particular and some of the star players, It'd be one thing if it was just like a one-off game. I'm usually pretty forgiving about that kind of stuff. But looking through the past 30 games of the top line in particular, Shifley and Connor are rocking like a sub 45% expected goal share, a sub 50% Corsi share. And like, I know people don't like fancy stats. This is actually something you can visually see. They're not winning battles in the offensive zone as often as they need to. They're not winning as many of those defensive zone battles. And there's a very clear difference between Shifley when he's really engaged and on it every shift, and when he's kind of just doing those moment to moment plays that look very pretty and have scored some beautiful goals, but he's not really giving the 100% that we've seen, especially heading into the Olympic break. That version of him, I think, has started to back off a little bit, and Connor himself has just kind of been a hot mess since the Olympic break. Yes, they are still scoring, and I think that's nice to see. They've actually been outscored together something like 29-23 at 5v5, which is not ideal. And so not only are they losing the actual goal battle, they're losing the expected goals battle. And, to that point, right? I'm not asking them to win every game, but they are, getting to decide to play together, which is a really big structural thing that impacts the entire lineup. And I think at some point, we're hearing from other players on the team that there is some disgruntlement. I think that Barron outburst during an interview where he said, "We're playing like we have nothing to play for," was a much bigger deal than anyone made it out to be. You really didn't hear a lot of people talking about it. And in fact, I thought the Jets broadcast tried to do damage control. That was a really telling comment from one of the players who consistently works very hard and is one of the most well-loved leader, locker roomy kind of voices, sort of an Adam Lowry vein. The fact that he kind of blew up and Lowry had to sort of answer that later in one of the post-game scrums, it tells me that there is some real concern and some dissension. It always happens that when you're losing and struggling, guys start to get real testy. But I think that was kind of indicative of where this season has been and where this team is. So this weekend, if things get ugly and guys start to look like they're quitting, not that I think it'll happen, but I am seeing some troubling body language. How they play against Pittsburgh and what they do against the Rangers will be very interesting. I've seen some guys look super engaged, and Velarde, Perfetti, Lambert, Morrissey, those guys all look really tight. I haven't seen any lack of fight in their games. Taves looks engaged too. I mean, he's trying really hard. But some of the top stars on this team haven't always looked 100%. And it's not like I expect them to be 100% every game. But if you are being paid like $8.5 to $10 million a season, or in Connor's case now $12 million a year, it kind of comes with the territory. There are high expectations for you. And if you can't meet it, then there has to be a conversation about why, especially if you are also dictating that, you're playing with a specific line mate, you've been this way for years, and you're not letting things be changed. So there's a lot of stuff here, structurally, hierarchically, and organizationally, that is going to take some time to unpack. This tour through the Metro this weekend will be fascinating. The game against the Rangers in particular has really big tanking implications. The Jets could potentially see the gap between them and New York close if the Rangers end up winning. So really big for the lottery odds. We'll see if the Jets pull out a major performance or if these games kind of fall a bit flat. If you've got score predictions, let me know them in the comments below. The last time the Jets had back-to-backs, they did win both games. Not so sure we're going to see that this weekend, but you never know. The NHL is weird. Any given Saturday and Sunday, as the saying sort of goes. Now, amidst all this, I also want to talk about what I'm looking for in this final stretch of the season. What do we want to see as fans? What do we want to hear? And what are we thinking about heading into next season? We'll chat about that coming right up. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever you're into, this is your chance to turn your basketball expertise into big winnings. You can mix spreads, player props, totals, and more to match how you see the slate playing out. And then you apply your profit boost and instantly bump up your potential payout. It's a win win situation for everyone. And especially as we head into March Madness, this is the best time to cash in. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, your way, now with more upside behind it. Head to fanduel.com to get started. That's fanduel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as I want to talk about heading into this final stretch of the season. What the heck are we looking for? At this point, right, we know what this team is. It's been clear for a while now that the Jets are not particularly good. I don't think that they're the worst team in the NHL, and that's very clear because you've seen how Vancouver and Chicago play. Yeah, they kind of play crappier hockey, which, yes, they're closer to the Jets in the standings than I would care to admit. But like, there's a pretty clear divide between the Jets and, some of those like bottom three teams. But, by the same token, Winnipeg is also not very good. So as we kind of move into these final weeks, one of the big things I'm curious to know is if Arniel ever resorts to any sort of nuclear option. The Jets' top line has kind of been one of those things that, aside from the right wing spot, has basically been untouchable. KFC and Scheifele have been allowed to play together for like the last several years. We saw, the Blake Wheeler top line stuff for many seasons under Pomo. That had a huge blowout that ended up with him getting the captaincy stripped. Now we have kind of Blake Wheeler 2.0 with Scheifele and Connor together, and that duo hasn't even been broken up very often. It's only happened when there were injuries. And the reason that I harp on it a lot is because if these guys truly are elite stars, the way that they're being paid to be and the way that they, view themselves, then they should be able to exist on separate lines. And the Jets, frankly, need it. If Winnipeg actually wants to make the playoffs and be a serious contender, they have got to find a way to spread the wealth of the offense. You can only do it so much when two of your top offensive producers, in terms of points production, are on one line. Yes, they do play a lot, and yes, they can score some great goals together. But if 81 can only do that next to 55, that's a really big problem. The Jets honestly just need more from some of their best players. And, it's also a front office problem, right? Like the Jets front office, especially Chevy, really didn't give this team a lot of fire support in the offseason. So you can't pin all of your hopes there. But again, this team keeps talking about being a playoff squad. So the only way that I think that they could even approach doing that is if they try and spread the wealth. I know it's going to have certain compromises here and there. I do think Scheifele is going to have to figure out how to play with guys who are not named Kyle Connor if you want to have a shot, because Scheifele can drive his own line. He's got that skill, and I've seen him do it many times. Connor, a little bit of a mystery box there. I don't feel as comfortable with that. But if you put him with Lowry and maybe a Perfetti, we know that 81 and 91 have some really good chemistry, and they balance each other out nicely. 17 has started to look more like the usual 17 we're used to. Adams' last couple of games, I thought, were moving in the right direction. I think that hip surgery he had is finally starting to, go away a little bit, right? The rehab process takes a very long time, especially for a guy in his 30s. That's tough to come back from, but he's looked more like the Adam Lowry we know and love. Again, like this isn't an ideal situation. And I know a lot of people will point to other contenders where, certain line combinations are pretty consistent. But I think in the case of the Jets, Winnipeg doesn't have the depth and elite talent to do that kind of stuff. They have to be a little more strategic and a little bit more willing to spread the wealth. And it's not like you can't get shifts where you reunite the top line or something. You can absolutely do that. You're going to do that with the power play. You're going to do that on, 3-on-3. You can do that if you have last change. I mean, there's just all sorts of ways to make sure that at times you get them playing together, but it shouldn't be every shift. That would be something that I think, if Arniel is able to exercise this decision and actually do it, I think it would, for one, be beneficial to the team overall, and maybe it would, perhaps suggest that the team's locker room leadership is a little more open to change. I don't anticipate seeing it at all. I'm pretty sure that Connor and Scheifele are going to have grave headstones next to each other. I can't imagine that they're ever going to be split apart until they are no longer Winnipeg Jets. It's just the way I think this team operates and how the players operate. I've said it before, the rest of the NHL doesn't do this kind of stuff. I know Winnipeg has unique circumstances, but if they continue to do this kind of catering to players, it's going to be an issue, and it's going to make it a lot harder to figure out how to reassemble and reconfigure the bottom nine to fit this team. But it is what it is. Hopefully, with all of this, we do at least continue to see more support for the youth. Lambert getting a big promotion last game, I thought was a really positive sign. It was deserved. We had a bad game or two, especially the Ducks game I thought was pretty rough. One of the goals against I didn't really think was his fault. I think it was a little bit unfortunate. You could probably argue his pass that ended up bouncing off of Fleury and going to Killorn was maybe not the best choice. It was clearly intended for Cole Koepke after watching the footage back, but, he should have been maybe a little more careful around Fleury, whatever, right? The past couple of games, he's been a lot more careful with the puck. He's made some really smart passes. He's looked very lively and engaged. This is more the Brad Lambert that I thought deserved to have a middle to top six deployment. And I'd be very curious to see if Arniel gives it to him from the start. Arnie has often put him on the fourth line to begin with, and I understand that decision. But again, I believe in the Jets needing to be a meritocracy. Spots shouldn't just be locked down because you like the guy and he's the established veteran. If somebody is legitimately making a case for a promotion, promote them. Even for a guy like Hayden Fleury, if I saw him putting together some really strong games, despite my own concerns about his history on the ice, I'd have said, yeah, give him more ice time. If he's earning it, he's earning it. I think he's done the opposite in this case, and that was clear from his benching the last game. But, I just think the Jets need to get with the program and make actual competition. You've got a lot of youth who haven't signed yet. You've got Boumedienne who's in college. And if guys like him don't see a future with the Jets because they think there's no chance they can even make this team, that's going to be a continued issue. You have to develop and draft. Draft to develop is the model, and you have to convince guys to come here. But, if you're already turning away the prospects that you're drafting because you're not even willing to give kids a chance, it's going to be an issue. So this is a really good opportunity to start to change that narrative and change that image. Give the kids who are actually performing a real chance to shine. And I think that goes a long way for a lot of players, both inside and outside of Winnipeg, looking in. So would love to hear your thoughts on that one. I know a lot of you are real pro youth at this point. It's not like the veterans have really been doing much anyways. I guess the last thing that I'm looking for is just to kind of watch the body language of the players. There have been moments this season where I thought Arniel was actually at risk of getting dumped. I think that's kind of abated, and obviously the Jets don't really fire anyone unless the situation gets to a certain point, and thus far they really haven't had this happen. Noel was really the last guy that actively just got dumped in favor of Maurice, but usually coaches tend to quit here or just don't get renewed. That's what's happened in the past. With this particular situation, as the team continues to struggle, I sort of wonder if guys tune Arniel out. That Barron thing, I keep coming back to that. It was such a visible and public display of frustration. It makes me wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Arniel has taken pot shots at Chevy too. So it's not just the players that are frustrated. There's real frustration from the staff as well, looking at the talent that they've been given to work with. It's not really a ton that they're able to do right now. So, it just feels like things are not feeling great with the Jets. There's some real problems. There's some real hurt feelings. And I don't know if this is stuff that's just going to abate over time and get better. But, given the trajectory of this team, given where they're headed and what we've seen so far, I feel like we're actually going in a different direction. I think things are only going to get worse before they get better. The thing that people don't, talk about and say when it comes to teams like Anaheim or San Jose, they had to suck for a long time and get a lot of picks before they started to really turn a corner. The Jets are trying to avoid that as much as possible, but I do wonder if at some point their avoidance ends up meaning nothing, right? It might just come for them anyways. So we'll see how all of that pans out. But, hopefully over the next few weeks, we just see, some sign of hope with this team because next season, right now, as it stands, it ain't looking too good. You've maybe got hope for a big lottery pick and not a lot else. Speaking of big lottery picks, I want to talk about the draft simulation that I ran. I did 30 with that famous one. I forget what it's called, but the Tankathon simulator, I think it is. Ran it 30 times. Not super in love with the results. I want to talk about why and what it means for the Jets and how they might be able to salvage the situation if it pans out the way that I think it might, coming right up. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that's kind of been a pain in the butt. That's why Gametime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast, without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans just like yourself. I've used Gametime when I was picking up Ravens playoff tickets. It was great, convenient. All of the prices were upfront, even when I was just looking at the ticket, which is awesome. No surprise fees, no hidden charges. They don't want to mess around. They don't want to screw you over. Gametime just wants you to have a good experience and get to the game as conveniently as possible. To that end, they even include panoramic seat views, so you know what you're actually paying for. You're not going in blind. It's awesome. And they even show you some of the best value seats in any arena, which is fantastic, right? You want to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck. So, you know what? Go with Gametime, right? Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. I ran the Tankathon draft lottery simulator the other day. I ran it for about 30 times, which most sample sizes I would prefer to have around 100 runs. There was no real way to automate it, which is kind of funny. I would have really loved to have done that, but I don't want to have to sit there and click 100 times. I'd prefer to just have a simulation RNG run in the background. But after having run it 30 times, I do think I had a sample size to the point where I started seeing a particular trend pop up, right? So Winnipeg right now is in 26th position, which means they have the 6th overall pick, at least on paper. But we know that with the draft lottery, teams can move up and down, even teams below 26 overall or above. In this case, the Jets, about half the time in that sample, actually moved a spot back to 7th overall. Now, not the worst. 7th overall this year will be still pretty dang good. Looking at the elite prospects, consolidated top 100 or so prospects, the top 8 is still pretty favorable, right? Stenberg at 1st overall, most likely. McKenna at 2nd. Veerhoff at 3rd. That's been relatively consistent. McKenna and Stenberg sometimes go back and forth, but assuming the Canucks actually get 1st overall, probably Stenberg. Chase Reed has really been a high riser and continues to be in that top 5 conversation. Tynan Lawrence, I think Lawrence at 5 overall here is a little high. I think a lot of recency bias is going to impact some drafting departments, which is why Viggo Bjork at 6 overall might actually get bumped up, and Tynan might go maybe even as low as 7th or 8th. Where that kind of leaves the Jets is interesting, right? As of right now, the Jets could potentially get a guy like Carson Karels. He's, based on their consolidated rankings, the 7th overall pick, which Karels, he's been putting up pretty monster numbers for Prince George. I am a little hesitant to go after a defenseman right now. Unless you're getting a Reed or a Veerhoff, I would tend to really want a forward this year. The wing depth, obviously, for the Jets isn't great, but in particular, the center depth is a big need. Winnipeg has to find a way to get a big young center. Bjork would be awesome. The whole push to make the Jets Swedish would be fantastic. Bjork has been putting up some really impressive results for Djurgårdens, which for a team, that is in a pretty tough league and is asking a young kid to anchor their top 6 center role, very impressive. He also has some positional versatility. He has technically played as a winger before, so he can do both. But there's also another guy that is a lot further down the list at 13th overall. I don't think he's actually going to go at 13th overall. I suspect he'll be a top 10 pick. That's Caleb Malhotra, with Brantford putting up pretty solid numbers. But at 6'2", he's a sizable center with really smooth skating, great hands, a really high work ethic, smart defensive acumen. He's the son of one of the greatest NHLers ever. So Caleb has a lot of expectation around him, and I could see him being a player that potentially is on the Jets list. He ticks off, I think, a lot of boxes that they would really like. Tynan, if he falls to Winnipeg at 7th, would be awesome. Fantastic pick. Super young player, just 17 right now at Boston University. His first, 10 games or so, he went pretty quietly. Boston is not a good team, but Lawrence in his last 5 is a point per game. So I think he's starting to put 2 and 2 together at the collegiate level. We saw something similar with McKenna. Tynan, look more at his history. He's got a ton of pop. He's a super fun player, very skilled skater, great center, high offensive motor. I think he has a lot of traits that would make him a perfect fit for what the Jets ultimately need. Winnipeg could also potentially walk away with the Belschutz. Belschutz, I do worry, has the risk of being misunderstood. He kind of reminds me of Kieran Walton, so if there's actually a team that would benefit from having another Walton type, it's probably the Jets, who would understand what kind of game Belschutz brings. He's a sizable, huge, rangy winger, but he's more about that finesse sort of play and working those stick angles in tight spaces than he is big hits and power forward-y kind of stuff. Alternatively, if the Jets really do decide to go with the defenseman, there's a lot out there. Carroll's is there. Lynn will be around there. Schmitz would probably be one of the top picks for me. Albert has been like a huge riser with Jukurit, and obviously with the Latvian team, he was really impressive in the World Juniors. I like Schmitz a lot, and I think he could be a fantastic choice. But again, I just think looking at where the Jets are and what they need, especially help up front, if they're trying to be a more competitive team, they've got to find a way to come away with a big forward. It's why I've really hammered home the idea that we probably need to be closer to that top 4 pick range than hanging around 6th or 7th. The number of times the Jets moved back to 7th or 8th was not ideal. 8th was a lot less frequent, only like once or twice did it happen. The Jets did win 1st and 2nd overall like 3 or 4 times, so take that for what it's worth, but mostly picking around 7th. It seems to be around where the Jets are looking to settle. So these next 15 to 16 games that are left of the season, they're going to be critical for the Jets. This is going to be a really big moment to decide just how high our odds are of potentially moving up in the draft. They're not going to be, bad enough to finish bottom 3, but if they can get closer to that range, I think that'll really boost their odds of coming away with one of the top prospects in this year's draft. Would be curious to know which young players and prospects are really on your radar, though. Who do you want the Jets to go after and why? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Next week, we'll talk about whatever happens over these next 2 games. Should be entertaining, should be interesting to say the least. We'll see if the team still has some fight left in it, but we will see this coming Monday. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and continuing to make Locked On your first listen of the day. We will see you tomorrow, we'll see you next week. But for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.